Hi everybody, Lynn Cox, clinical hypnotherapist, just out for some natural vitamin D. Thought I'd take this opportunity to say a few words about no contact. No contact with people who formerly assaulted or abused you. Be it if you were in a domestic relationship as an adult and were with a violent partner, or if you were a child, and if you're abused as a child by family member, friend of the family, too often that does happen. It's committed by a family member, or whether it's immediate family or extended family, i.e. uncle, grandfather, cousin, etc. So this is something that a lot of people struggle with, and there's one very high level answer to it. And I want to be clear that I'm talking very specifically about domestic violence from the perspective of physical violence. A lot of people have emotional abuse happen in relationships, and for purposes of this video and this particular topic, I'm keeping my comments related to actual physical violence as an adult, because I don't want to wade into murky waters as to, is the person who you're with, were they truly a narcissist? What constitutes the definition of abuse? So I don't want to get hung up on that. I'm going to talk about physical violence. So that's where I'm coming from when I speak to this issue. And then as far as a child goes, there's a lot of child abuse that happens that's not physical in nature. But you know what? For the purposes of this video, I'm going to come at it from that perspective as well. Physical violent abuse or childhood sexual abuse. The overarching answer is absolutely zero contact with somebody who committed violence, physical violence and assault on you is the best option in order for your psyche, for your spirit, and for your soul to be able to heal. Having to have constant contact with somebody who assaulted you in those ways, that in and of itself is re-victimizing, re-traumatizing. And so if it can be avoided, I highly suggest that. This is where it gets tricky for people though. And I'm going to talk about a couple of instances I've seen now. Instances, for example, where somebody was abused by her father, and then the father maintained the relationship within the rest of the family with the mother/wife, as well as other siblings and extended family. So in a case like that, it can become very difficult for people who have experienced that kind of child abuse, because in order to not have any contact with that individual, basically there would have had to have been no contact with the rest of the family. And this is something that's really difficult for people who have been assaulted and abused as children to deal with, because unfortunately, very often it is beyond the pale for whatever reason, and I don't focus on why it is that others can't acknowledge disturbing truths and facts. That's not my area of focus. I work with people who have experienced that kind of abuse to help them recover and help them feel better, not worry so much about the psyche of, let's say, a mother who stays married to a violent husband. But it does become very challenging for people, because then they have to potentially look at cutting ties from the rest of their family in order to have no contact with the person who abused them. And We are social creatures and social beings. We do require close, intimate, supportive, nurturing relationships. If we can have these with our family, with our immediate family, that's ideal. That's not the case for many people. And also the way that we've evolved as a human species, you know, going back thousands of years in the hunter-gatherer days, if you were ousted from your tribe, we'll say, that essentially was a death sentence. When we lived that way as hunter-gatherers in these smaller units, you needed the safety of the group in order to have survival, to be able to have protection from the elements, from animals, to be able to have food, shelter. Literally, your survival was sorry, I'm just walking by some kids. Oh, they're so cute. Your survival was attached to being part of that group, that smaller tribal group, family group. And our primitive brains have not quite caught up with modern society. So while it's deeply traumatizing and emotionally and psychologically and spiritually very, very hard for people who have experienced abuse by a family member, and then where that family member is not held to account and people keep in a relationship with them, you know, that's a very difficult situation. However, 9 chances out of 10, your actual survival does not depend on that. You can survive without that family intact. And that's a decision that everybody has to make. I've seen some people set up parameters around, you know, not having somebody mentioned, or, having relationships with some members who might still have a relationship with the abuser, and just having some boundaries around that. But it is a very personal decision. But one thing that is for certain is contact with the person who did those things to you is a re-traumatizing experience to have. And I haven't seen a case, and maybe I will the longer I do this work, of where whoever committed the abuse was able to somehow reform, and that there was some kind of family unit healing. I haven't seen that yet, and I haven't heard of it. I'd love to hear of it. I have a feeling, though, that would be a real exception to the quote-unquote rule. So, if possible, no contact. If you're in that family dynamic, that is a real challenge, and people really struggle with it. And then often, because we've got this primitive wiring in us to feel the fear of straying from the unit, that can hold us back sometimes too. You know, there's the phrase, blood is thicker than water, but really consider that and really ask yourself if that's true in cases like this, in cases where there was, physical and sexual abuse committed, sometimes as adults. If you really want to recover from that, you've got tough decisions to make, and may have to form your own sense of family through other friends and people and networks. And it is sad, it's a loss. People really struggle with it. A lot of struggle about what to do in those situations. And then I want to talk as well briefly about a situation where there's domestic violence and because of I've talked about the injustice system, if there are children involved and the and it's typically the female partner, so I'm going to talk about this. If it's the woman who's left that relationship, but the abusive father still has rights to see the child or have partial custody with the child, sometimes there's no choice there, and that's a really, really tough one. I actually had a call from a woman experiencing just that situation where there still had to be contact because of the legalities involved in that, and the father still having access to the child, and there not having been enough proof for her to have sole custody, and it was causing her all sorts of issues, a lot of chronic stress and anxiety. So that is a really tough one, and I don't know the answer or the solution to that. I mean, that's got to be within everybody's realm to address on their own. And unfortunately, the systems that we're, the culture and the systems that we're living in when it comes to things like this, if there's not an actual criminal conviction, and if the violent partner still has access to the child, that is a really tough one. And I think that the best that a mother or a person can do in that situation is to be the absolute strongest, best example of being an empathetic, courageous, loving human being. Educate as much as possible, document as much as possible as well too, because unfortunately we do live with these systems in place that are very, very far from perfect, and that are very unjust, and that's a real challenge for people in these situations. And I have serious empathy for them, and sometimes the only thing you can do is do your best to feel as much at peace in yourself and healing in yourself as a way to be a good example for a child if they're involved, and that's a situation. But the overarching headline for that is no contact is the best option for somebody who's experienced physical abuse, sexual abuse as an adult or as a child. If that can be done, that's the best way to approach recovering and healing from those situations. So I hope everyone's having a great day, and I'll be on again soon. Bye for now.